What do you call a girl who was kidnapped and then spent 3,000 years being asked why she stayed? Persephone has a name for that question. It is not a kind one. This is not the love story people keep trying to tell you. This is the story of a girl who was taken, a mother who nearly ended the world looking for her, and a queen who was never, not once, asked what she wanted. Before she was queen of anything, she was Kor. It meant simply the maiden. She was Demeter's daughter, and Demeter raised her the way you raise something you're terrified of losing. Close, watched, wrapped in gold. It showed. Grain grew heavier in the fields where Kor walked. Flowers turned toward her before the sun even asked them to. She was spring, and she didn't even know it yet, because no one had ever needed to tell her. The world just did what she was. Some tellings put her in a meadow called Nysa. Others, centuries later, move her to a place called Enna on the island of Sicily, picking flowers with a crowd of girls her own age, laughing, her arms already full of narcissus and violets. The setting shifts depending on who's telling it. What doesn't shift is what happens next. The ground did not crack open. It opened like a door, one that had clearly been waiting, and Hades rose out of it in a golden chariot and took her. The oldest surviving account of this moment does not soften it. It says he seized her against her will. It says he put her in his chariot and drove away while she wept. It does not call it a romance. It does not call it fate. It calls it exactly what it was. One version of the story gives her a witness, a river nymph named Cyane, who saw the chariot tearing through her waters and tried to stand in its way, tried, with nothing but her own body, to stop a god. She failed, and the grief of failing dissolved her into her own river, until she wasn't a person anymore, just water, weeping into the ground, forever. No one else saw what happened. No one else could say where she'd gone. So Demeter searched. For 9 days and 9 nights she walked the earth with 2 burning torches, and she did not eat, did not drink, did not wash, did not stop. She asked the sun. She asked the moon. She asked anyone who might have seen her daughter disappear into the ground like something that was never meant to be permanent. And while she searched, she stopped doing the only other thing she knew how to do. She stopped making things grow. Wheat failed in the fields. Seeds sat in the dirt and refused to become anything. Rivers of grain that had fed entire cities simply stopped. This wasn't a metaphor to the people living through it. It was famine, spreading exactly as fast as a mother's grief. Humans began to starve, and humans starving stopped offering sacrifices to gods who no longer seemed to be listening. That got Zeus's attention, not the missing daughter, the missing tribute. He sent Hermes down into the underworld with a single order for his brother. Give her back. Not a request, a command, dressed as diplomacy, because even gods know when a famine is about to become their problem too. Hades agreed. Almost. Before Persephone could leave, he placed a pomegranate in her hands, split open, seeds like garnet catching the underworld's grey light, and she ate. Not 1 seed. 7. Different accounts disagree about how much she understood in that moment. In the oldest version, she says herself later to her own mother that he forced her, pressed the fruit on her secretly against her will, the same way he'd taken her in the first place. In a version written centuries afterward by a Roman poet who preferred his tragedies a little gentler, she wanders the garden herself, plucks the fruit out of simple hunger, and eats it, not knowing what it costs. Force or innocence? The story has never fully decided. What it has always agreed on is the rule underneath it. Whoever eats the food of the dead belongs, in part, to the dead. 7 seeds is not a large debt, but the underworld does not deal in large debts. It deals in permanence, wearing the shape of something small and sweet, so a division was struck. The oldest telling of this story, the one closest to the source, says Persephone would spend 1/3 of the year below and 2/3 above with her mother in the light. It was later poets, writing in Rome centuries afterward, who trimmed that arrangement into something cleaner, more symmetrical, easier to remember. 6 months in the world above, 6 months in the world below. The exact split has drifted, depending on who's counting. What hasn't drifted in any version anyone has ever told is what it cost her to get any time in the sunlight at all. A girl, agreeing to nothing, and living with the terms anyway. Here is the part the romantic retellings tend to rush past, what she became once she stopped being anyone's daughter to protect. She sat beside Hades on his throne, and she was not decoration. When a nymph named Mythveil made it known she thought she'd make a better queen than the one already sitting there, Persephone didn't argue with her. She turned her into a plant, mint, crushed underfoot forever after, its sharp smell the closest thing that story has to an apology. When a spirit named Ascalaphus reported that he'd personally seen Persephone eat those seeds, ensuring she could never fully leave, she had him turned into an owl, a bird that flies only at night, cursed to announce misfortune to everyone who hears it, the way he'd once announced hers. And when a mortal named Orpheus walked all the way into the underworld to beg for his dead wife back, it was not Hades who was moved to grant it. It was Persephone. Mercy in that kingdom ran through her. She was never handed a throne because someone loved her. She built authority out of the only material the underworld had ever given her. Consequence, cross her, and something changes shape. Beg her, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she listens. That is not gentleness, that is power. And by the time the stories stop calling her Core and start calling her Persephone, Queen of the Dead, everyone in the underworld already knows the difference. She never chose the door in that meadow. Nobody asked her that day if she wanted flowers or a kingdom. Nobody has ever gone back and asked her, in any version, if the 7 seeds were a trick she should have seen coming, or a trap no one could have survived. But somewhere between the chariot and the throne, the question stopped mattering, because she'd stopped waiting for anyone to ask it. She ruled. Cross her carelessly, and you became mint. Cross her honestly, and you might yet be forgiven, on her own terms, in a kingdom that had never once needed her permission, and now could not function without it. That is not the same as forgiving what happened to her. It's colder than that, and it's stronger. It's ownership of a story that was never supposed to be hers to write in the first place. Every spring, Demeter gets her daughter back, and the earth remembers for a while what it looked like before any of this happened. Every winter, Persephone goes home, not to a prison anymore, but to a throne she built out of the worst thing that ever happened to her. She was never asked, but 6 months out of every year, the entire underworld asks her,